let's come on to that, because I wanted to ask you about that point too, not so much with regards to Jeremy Greenstock. You said you didn't accept Sir Christopher Mayer's analysis that there was a fundamental shift of policy at Crawford. You disagreed with his evidence on that point. But was there not also documentary evidence, some of which indeed leaked into the newspapers, that in March of 2002, as part of the preparations for Crawford, Sir David Manning went to Washington with changed instructions, what Sir Christopher described as a change in the instructions given to him with regard to this very question of regime change. So there was an evolution at that time, wasn't there? Or do you disagree with Sir Christopher on that? He said, I got a chunky set of instructions in March of 2002. He referred to Sir David's visit. He said one of the main things that he was seeking to do, and this was new, and I, if you like, borrowed his instructions to do my side of things, was to say to the Americans, quote, look, if you want to do regime change, and if this is going to require military action, you guys are powerful enough to do it all on your own. You can do it on your own. You have got the power to do it. But if you are going to do this, and you want your friends and partners to join you, far better than that you should do it inside an alliance, preferably taking the UN route. Would you regard that as a change or an evolution or what?
I think it's obviously at a different part of the time frame, but I think that is consistent with the overall approach that I've been trying to set out. The Prime Minister's overall approach of saying ultimately there is going to be disarmament. We are going to do our level best to get that done through the diplomatic route without a single shot being fired. But if push comes to shove and the diplomatic route fails, then Britain would see it as its responsibility and its duty to take part in military action. So I think that's consistent.
I've just got two more points and then we're going to take a break, but arising from the conversation thus far. On Camp David, and more generally, you said that we were very keen all along to emphasize the importance of the UN. You also said that the Prime Minister fundamentally shared the view that Saddam Hussein had to be confronted. That's a fair representation of what you've said this morning.
Confronted as in faced up to his obligations.
Did the Prime Minister believe that Saddam had to be confronted even if this was not supported by the United Nations?
If the United Nations, through the inspections route, had discovered that there were weapons weren't there and he wasn't a threat and what's all this about, then I'm absolutely sure the Prime Minister would have...
That wasn't my question. My question was, if the United Nations did not support confronting Saddam Hussein, was the Prime Minister still, as you say, fundamentally of the view that he had to be confronted, with or without the United Nations support?
Well, I thought it was interesting in Jeremy Greenstock's evidence, where I thought he made a really telling point at the end of his evidence about, in a sense, it's almost a philosophical discussion. It's about what is the United Nations. It's not a kind of arbitering body. The United Nations is a collection of the nations. So, and what you ended up with was a fundamental disagreement within the Security Council and the whole of the United Nations. If the United Nations en masse had said, hold on a minute, Prime Minister Blair, this whole Iraq thing's overblown and all the rest of it, but nobody was saying that. Well, even the French were saying there is a threat.
You still haven't answered my question.
No, but your question depends on there being a single view that is defined as the United Nations view.
Well, there is a single view if the United Nations Security Council adopts a position.
Right. But if the British... if you were saying they adopt a position that the British government and the American government didn't agree with.
If the British government and the American government were not able to get the support of the United Nations Security Council, the Prime Minister was prepared to go ahead without the United Nations.
Well, ultimately, when it came to military action, he believed that route, that having persuaded George Bush to take this issue to the United Nations, having made clear that in his view, the United Nations had to resolve the issue and not avoid the issue, through some extraordinary diplomatic work, not least by Jeremy Greenstock, Resolution 1441 is unanimously agreed, but then when it came to the next step, elements of United Nations, and in particular the French, walked away from anything that might lead to, in their view, to the United Nations authorising military action.
We'll come back to that later on. I think you've effectively given an answer to my question. My final question is that in these interactions with the White House, presumably the Prime Minister wrote to President Bush from time to time. Did you see that correspondence?
Yes.
And did he tell President Bush in writing during 2002 that he would support the President if he took military action?
I think that I would certainly say the tenor of the Prime Minister wrote quite a lot of notes to the President, and I would say that the tenor of them was that, as I said earlier, we share the analysis, we share the concern, we are absolutely with you in making sure that Saddam Hussein is faced up to his obligations and that Iraq is disarmed. If that can't be done diplomatically and it has to be done militarily, Britain will be there. That would definitely be the tenor of his communications to the President.
So, without conditions?
Well, it's not a question of being without conditions, because if you're saying that along that route, and bear in mind, when it finally came
let's not go all the way along the route.
Well, you've just asked me a question, if I can answer it. 12 years after the first resolution, 6 months after George Bush takes it to the United Nations, 4 months after 1441, I think it was pretty measured, and I think the Prime Minister was all the way through trying to get it resolved without a single shot being fired. Now, in the end, he's the guy at the top who has to make the judgments with all the advice that he gets about how best to do that. But that was his motivation right the way through.
Can you... Oh, Martin. Can you take a break? I think we need to take a break at this point. Can you save it up till after the break? Thank you. Let's break now and come back at 11:30. Thank you.